Today, we're going to talk about coastlines and canyons. Not focusing just on the beach, but going a few hundred kilometers offshore, looking at our continental margins and the canyons that dissect them. So, our coastlines, or our margins, exist where the thick granitic continental crust transitions into the thin basaltic oceanic crust, right? Looking at this image, you can see the continental crust. It's really thick, meaning it sits up higher, forming land and mountains, but also sinks down lower into the mantle below it. That's made of granite. It's relatively low density compared to the oceanic crust, which is made out of basalt, slightly higher density, also thinner. So it not only sinks down lower into the mantle, creating our oceans, but doesn't go quite, the bottom of it doesn't go quite as deep as continental crust, right? Because it's thinner, it can sink lower to form the oceans without going as deep as the continental crust. And on these margins, we have continental shelves, which is the flat area. If you were to walk into the ocean from our beach and just keep walking, assuming you could hold your breath and walk under the ocean, you would feel like you were walking just on a flat shelf for tens of kilometers, if not hundreds of kilometers somewhere, some places in the world. That shelf, though, eventually will break. We call it the shelf break, where the slope will get steeper. Sometimes there's huge cliffs falling down. More often than not, it's just a slight grade, right? Well, you'll start to be able to feel that you're walking downhill. Um, again, if you could walk on the ocean floor. Then you get to the bottom of the continental slope, where, right, there is a slope. You can feel, you can see the sediment cascading downhill. You get to the continental rise at the bottom. That's where that sediment accumulates. It's kind of like a bump or an apron of sand accumulating at the bottom of the slope until eventually you get out into the flat abyssal plain. I was going to say boring, but not really boring. You'll learn later that there's some really cool stuff happening out there. It's just not quite as dynamic in the abyssal plain. So, taking more of a quantitative look at our margins, this image shows the density of the basaltic oceanic crust versus the continental granitic crust. You can see that continental crust is about 2.8 grams per cubic centimeter, whereas basalt is 2.9 grams per cubic centimeter. So basalt's slightly more dense, which is why it sinks lower and creates our oceans. But overall, the continental crust is way thicker, right? It can get up to like 30 kilometers thick, whereas our oceanic crust is around 5-ish kilometers thick. Um, and this is an ideal margin, right? Where that thick continental crust slowly tapers into and transitions into that thinner basalt oceanic crust. And when you see images like this in your textbook, or when you see images like this that I show on the screen, know that that is the most simplified image possible without showing you all of the weird possible different scenarios. But I'm curious, what scenarios do you think exist? Why might a typical margin not actually look like an ideal margin? Um, I'll give you one example and say that maybe there is convergence, right? And lots of faulting. So maybe in some places the basalt is diving underneath the granitic crust, but also maybe there's an island on top of that basalt, which has been pushed up onto the continental granitic crust, making things a little weird, right, with convergence there. So that's an example. I want you to think about three other reasons, other keyword there, three other reasons that the geologic structure of a margin might be a little bit more complex than the ideal image that I just showed you.